Hi everyone, it's Dr. Shannon from the Abrams Planetarium back again with another video for the Grand Ledge Area District Libraries. And this time we are going to be talking about the spring equinox, also known as the vernal equinox. So we're going to learn about what that day is, what makes it special, and what makes it special astronomically speaking. And then we'll end with some of the spring constellations you can go outside and see as we move into one of my favorite seasons when it's warmer, the seeds are starting to bud, and we get to see flowers again. So let's head over to Stellarium. This is what we use to take a look at the night sky. Stellarium is a free software that you can get at stellarium.org. So go ahead and go check that out if you want to download this and check out the constellations on your own. But we'll head over to Stellarium right now. So here I am in the corner again, and I have us set back to the winter solstice, so back on December 21st, before the sun rises. And we're going to start here so we can compare what happens in the winter to what happens in the spring. Before we get into that, I want us to take a look at a few parts of the sky though. So first of all, we have our horizon here where the sky and the ground appear to meet, and along the horizon we have these nice big red letters. We have the letter N for north, NE for northeast, E for east, SE for southeast, S for south, southwest, west, northwest, and then back to north. So we're going to use that to help us keep track of where the sun rises and sets. Another thing we're going to turn on, we're going to look towards the south, is our altitude azimuth grid. So this is a coordinate system that we use within astronomy in order to keep track of where things are relative to our horizon. So for an observer on Earth, where is something in the sky? And so this is, the azimuth is the directions basically, but we're using degrees. So we have 0 degrees at north, we can go around 90 degrees to east, 180 degrees to south, and 270 degrees to west, and full 360 back to north. So this is just a more precise way of talking about which direction something is in. Then we also have altitude, which is how many degrees above the horizon something is. So I'm going to turn us towards the south here. Each one of these horizontal lines marks another 10 degrees above the horizon. So we have 10, 20, 30, and so on, up to 90 degrees at our zenith, which is the point directly overhead. So you measure the altitude as 0 degrees above the horizon, right on the horizon, up to 90 degrees to overhead. And we're going to use this to look at some properties of the sun's path on different times of the year. So like I said, we have it set to right before the sun rises on the winter solstice. So we're going to look at the sun. We're going to look towards the east where the sun rises. Oh, one more thing. We're going to also turn on our meridian line. I almost forgot. So the meridian is this dark green line here. You know what? That's hard to see against the azimuth, so let's go change it to bright pink. Okay, so we have our meridian here. So this is a line that goes from directly north through the zenith and then back down towards the south. And it splits our sky up into the eastern half of the sky and the western half of the sky. As things move in their arcs across the sky from east to west, they will be at their highest point when they cross the meridian. And that's true for the sun, it's also true for the stars. So we're going to see how high the sun gets for a day by seeing when it crosses the meridian. So let's go look again at the winter sky. So we'll start by looking towards the east. We're going to speed time up just a little bit here. And we're going to pause right around the time that the sun rose back on the winter solstice. So there it is. You can see the sun is over here rising towards the southeast. And we're going to follow it. It has a very short arc. Going to get to the meridian. So you can see everything is getting higher on the eastern side. So that's another way of thinking about things rise in the east and set in the west. It gets to its highest point here. I'm going to get it right on the meridian. And you can see it gets to about 10, 20, about 23, 24 degrees. We can click on the sun and it will tell us on Stellarium exactly how high up it is. It is 23 degrees and 51 minutes. So, and that's just like minutes on a clock. Once we get to 60, it goes to another degree. So it's about 24 degrees above the horizon on the first day of winter, back on our winter solstice. Also, fun fact of the day, when the sun crosses the meridian, we call that local noon. So before we had standardized time zones, noon was just when the sun crossed the meridian. But now that we have standardized time zones, that local noon will not necessarily line up with noon on the clock, because local noon will happen in New York before it'll happen for us in Michigan because it's farther east, even though we're in the same time zone. All right, so let's finish watching the sun now. So here's the sun. It starts to set. See, now it's getting lower in the sky as it moves across. It's going to set towards the west, and it'll set roughly in the southwest. So there goes our sun. So let's compare that now to the spring. So we're going to go look over in the east again. And we're going to go set our first day of spring in 2020, which is on March 20th. So the first day of spring, the spring equinox, happens around March 20th or 21st every year. Exactly which day it changes. This year it's the 20th, but it's around there every year. So let's go move us to about 4 o'clock in the morning, 4:22, so before sunrise. And we're going to watch the sun rise here. So we're going to speed time up again, just like we did, and let's see where the sunrise is. Make a prediction in your head and see if you're right. We have Jupiter and Saturn right before the sun rises, which is nice. And I'm going to pause it. So there's our sun rising. It's not quite above the horizon, so let's zoom in. Oh, it's right on the horizon. I stopped it at the right time. Go me. So here's the sun rising. It's just on the horizon on the spring equinox. You can see it's rising exactly east. So in general, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, but it doesn't rise exactly east and set exactly west, except 2 days a year. And one of those days is the spring equinox, the first day of spring. So here's the sun rising exactly east, and let's follow it through the day now. I'm going to speed time up, and we're going to try to pause it when it crosses that meridian. So you can see it's rising. Also, because meridian, when the sun is on the meridian, that was called local noon. That means it was morning on this side and afternoon on this side when it crosses. So in Latin, you would say the sun was anno meridian when it was on the eastern side, or AM, and it was post meridian or PM. So that's where AM and PM come from. Another fun fact of the day. So here's the sun crossing the meridian here. You can see it's higher, so this is where it was in the winter. It's about 23.5 degrees higher when we cross it in the spring equinox. So if we click on it again, we can see the altitude is now 47.5 degrees or so. So it's gone up by 23.5 degrees. And that might sound familiar because that is the tilt of the Earth. And so we see these differences of 23.5 degrees on our equinoxes and solstices because it all relates back to the tilt of the Earth. And that's why we have seasons in the first place. So there is our sun. It's crossing our meridian on our spring equinox. And now let's speed time back up and see where it sets. What's your prediction? Where do you think it's going to set? I'm going to watch it as it goes down towards the west. All right. Here we go. I'm going to try to pause it right there. It's a little hard to see because we have trees in our way. So let's, you know what, we have the power to change our trees in here. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to change our landscape to the ocean where there are no trees. And let's go ahead and actually watch it as it sets here. So here's the sun setting, and you can see it's going to set exactly west. Not quite perfect, but close. And it's not going to always be exactly perfect because everything is constantly in motion, but it is pretty close to exactly west. And so that's our equinoxes, and that's what makes the day special, at least in terms of where the sun rises and sets. It rises exactly east, it sets exactly west. In the wintertime, it rises and sets more towards the south. In the summertime, it'll be more towards the north. But that's one thing that makes it special. Let's go back to, oop, I clicked the wrong button. All right, so we're going to go back now to the morning. So about 4 o'clock in the morning. And we're going to also see how long our day was. So we'll see the sun rising. We'll pause it right when it's rising. Right around here. Let's make sure it's right around there. There we go. So around 7:45 in the morning is when the sun rises. Now let's follow it through the day towards set to see how many hours of daylight we have. We're going to go faster. Whee! It's fun to play with time. Right here is right when it sets. So it goes to about 7:45 in the evening. So we went from 7:45 in the morning to about 7:45 in the evening. So that gives us 12 hours of daylight. So we have less than 12 in the wintertime. We have more than 12 after the equinox in the summertime. But on the equinoxes, that's when we have about 12 hours of sunlight. Now, it's not perfect. Again, things are in constant motion, so we're never going to be exactly 12 hours, but we're pretty darn close. So on the equinoxes, we have 12 hours of daylight. So we have an equal amount of daylight at 12 hours as we do nighttime, which is 12 hours. And that's where the term equinox comes from. Equinox comes from Latin for equal night, because we have equal amount of day and equal amount of night. And so that is our spring solstice, spring equinox, or the vernal equinox. Vernal just being another way of saying spring. So that's one reason why this is a particularly special day. But let's dig a little deeper into the astronomical origins of this. This is a special day from what we can observe very easily. But let's go ahead and take this off, this grid. And I'm going to put up another grid. I'm going to also turn off our meridian for now. Okay. So this grid is a different coordinate system that we use. It's called RA and Dec, which stands for right ascension, RA, and declination. And this uses the celestial equator as a reference point rather than the horizon. So I'm going to turn on this equator. And again, it's hard to see, so let's go make it bright pink. Okay. So here is our equator, the celestial equator. This is basically if we could take Earth's equator and stretch it out big enough that we could see, but kept it lined up with the actual equator, we would see it at this part in our sky. So right ascension is the measure around the equator, and declination is how many degrees above or below the equator something is. Now this is really hard to imagine, but within a computer system, this system will actually track with the constellations and with the stars and with the sun. So the stars will keep a constant right ascension and declination, and you pop this into a computer, telescopes can track things a little bit more easily. So, but it's not very good for just thinking about things. But it is good for defining things astronomically. So we're going to go ahead and pause this real quick. We also have another line in our sky that is an imaginary line that we define as the ecliptic. And the ecliptic is, I'm going to go ahead and make this bright yellow. Okay. So the ecliptic is the plane of our solar system. So all of our planets lie in a flat disk around the sun. And so we can think of that as a flat plate, essentially. And if we could see the edge of that plate from Earth, it would follow this line here called the ecliptic. Now these two are tilted by 23.5 degrees because the Earth is not straight up and down. The equator doesn't line up with the ecliptic because the Earth is tilted by 23.5 degrees. So as we go around the sun, from our perspective, the sun will appear to move along this ecliptic line. Now there are 2 points where the ecliptic and the equator cross. And one of those days is the spring equinox. So as the sun moves along, the sun will cross the celestial equator on its path along the ecliptic. So let's go back to daytime on the spring equinox. And when we do that, we can see, let's zoom in on it, this is one of the days where the sun is crossing. This is the spring equinox. So the sun is on our ecliptic and it's on the celestial equator. And we also define this day as where 0 hours right ascension is. That's just an arbitrary decision made by astronomers, but this is when the sun has a right ascension of 0. So that's the astronomical definition of the equinox. It's the day that the sun, or the moment that the sun is crossing the equator, the celestial equator in our sky. So that's some information on our spring equinox. What are we going to observe that day? How is the sun going to appear to move across our sky? And how do astronomers define it? So let's switch gears a little bit now and take a look at our spring constellations. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off all of these lines and turn back on our atmosphere. And let's go take us through to the evening time. All right, and let's change our landscape back to where we were before. All right, so here is our night sky. So we'll look towards the north. Again, we've talked about this in previous videos, but we do have our constellations. So first let's look for the Big Dipper. See if you find the Big Dipper in the sky. Here is our Big Dipper, and it is part of Ursa Major, the Big Bear. So the Big Dipper is a part of the constellations that are considered circumpolar for our location. That means they're up every night of the year because they are close to our North Star. So the outer 2 stars here of our Big Dipper, we follow them, we find the North Star here, and it's the end of the handle of the Little Dipper right there. And as our stars go along in their paths, they go around in circles, and the North Star stays put because our North Pole points right at the North Star. So that just spins around in place, so it looks like it stays in place, and all the other stars go around in circles, and the farther away it is from the North Star, the bigger the circle. So these stars towards the north have small enough circles that they're always above the horizon. They're up every night of the year. So other circumpolar constellations include Cassiopeia, this W shape here, the Queen of Ethiopia in Greek mythology. We're going to go ahead and pause that and take us back to the evening. To about 10 o'clock at night. So when we get to about 10 o'clock at night, though, on the spring equinox, we can see the Big Dipper, or Ursa Major, is much higher than it was in the winter. And Cassiopeia is always on the opposite side of the North Star from the Big Dipper. So they're switching places in the sky right now. The Big Dipper is much higher, Cassiopeia is much lower. In the wintertime, it was the opposite. So those are our circumpolar constellations. But as the Earth goes around the sun, our night side faces different sets of stars, and those are our seasonal constellations, and that's what we see towards the south. The circumpolar constellations, if you think about our solar system, these are the ones that we're looking at above the plane of the solar system, whereas the ones towards our south are the ones that are more aligned with our plane. So they change throughout the seasons. So here we do still see some of our winter constellations. They're more towards the west at 10 o'clock at night. They're going to start setting earlier and earlier, and by late spring we won't see them anymore, but we can still get a peek of them even in the springtime. So over here we have Orion, the hunter. We follow his belt downwards to Sirius in Canis Major, our big dog. We can make a triangle with Betelgeuse, Sirius, and this other bright star nearby called Procyon to find Canis Minor, our little dog. So it's 2 stars, it's a line, so that's our hot dog. We can also follow the belt upwards in this direction to find Aldebaran, which means the follower in Arabic because it follows the Pleiades star cluster over here. And this is part of Taurus the bull. And so on the spring equinox, you'll see the moon is right in between the horns of the bull, Taurus the bull, so go check that out. And also near the bull is Mars, which is a very nice planet to go outside. You can go outside and say hi to Perseverance the rover that just landed on Mars a few weeks ago. So we're very excited about that latest Mars rover. Taurus shares a star with Auriga, the charioteer or the chariot driver, but it's also has a smaller constellation that used to be its own constellation with Capella, the mother goat star, and the kids. I'm going through the winter constellations pretty quick as just a review of what you can see on the spring equinox. And then we can also go from Rigel, the bright blue foot of Orion, up to Betelgeuse and keep going. And we find Castor and Pollux, which are the heads of the twins of Gemini. So these constellations are considered our winter constellations. And you will be able to see them in early spring still before they set below the horizon. But as we get more into spring, they'll set earlier and we won't see them anymore. So what are our spring constellations? What are considered part of the spring sky? Those are over here in the southeast, and we can see them rising, and they'll rise earlier and earlier as we go through the spring. And let's maybe go about an hour later so that they are nice and high in our sky. So probably the most well-known spring constellation is Leo the Lion. And Leo has a sickle shape for his head, or you can also think of it as a backwards question mark. So see if you can find a backwards question mark to mark the head of Leo at all. All right, are you ready? Here it is. This is our backwards question mark to mark Leo. And then behind it is a triangle, and that marks the tail of the lion. So here's Leo the lion. Another way to find it that's really handy, the Big Dipper here is really great. So remember we talked about the Big Dipper is high in the sky in the spring. Use that Big Dipper to help you find the spring constellations. It's really handy for that. So we used our outer 2 stars of the Big Dipper to go this way to find our North Star. You can use it to go this way, the opposite direction, to find Leo. So the Big Dipper points at Leo. Some people like to think of it a little bit differently. So if we take the Big Dipper here and imagine it's filled with milk and there's a hole in it, the milk drops down onto the cat to slurp it up. So that's another way to remember it. But this is Leo the lion. Some people like to think it looks like a mouse, so that's the nose of the mouse, and then here's the tail. So it's a game of cat and mouse. Ha, ba-dum, yeah, we got lots of bad jokes here. Anyway, we have our Leo the lion. It's down here, the sort of dot of the backwards question mark is a star Regulus. So here's the name up in the left corner, Regulus, and has the same root as regal. So this is the king, lion king, regal. That's one way to think about it. So that's Regulus. We can also go over here to the back pointy bit, the tail. This is Denebola, which comes from the Arabic for lion's tail. So that's our lion's table here. All right, another constellation that is up in the spring that you can find using the Big Dipper is take the handle of the Big Dipper. It makes this arc shape. And you can follow that arc to Arcturus, which is, it looks a little more red than this in the real sky, but you arc to Arcturus, and it's the bottom of this sort of kite shape here, which is the constellation Buotes. So it's spelled Bootes, which looks like booties, so get your giggles out. But you pronounce the O as two separate words, so it often has an umlaut, or two separate sounds, so it has an umlaut on it usually. So it's Buotes. I will turn that on. So this O sometimes has an umlaut over it, so two dots. But this is Buotes, which is the herdsman. So he takes care of animals. And in some versions of his story, he might take care of bears, or Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. But you can go outside and find Buotes with the nice bright star Arcturus. Once you arc to Arcturus, you can spike to Spica. So go in a straight line. So arc to Arcturus and then straight line to the bright star Spica, which is part of the constellation of Virgo the Maiden. So here is her body, Spica is on her hip, here are her arms. Most of the Virgo stars are a little hard to see, but Spica is nice and bright. So arc to Arcturus and spike to Spica in Virgo, right there. Now, there's a set of 3 constellations that's sort of right next to Virgo. It's fairly bright. This one right here is called Corvus the Crow. It looks like another kite shape. Sometimes it's drawn more as an arrow. But this is Corvus the Crow. This one is very nice and easy to see, even with a lot of light pollution in the city. So this is a really fun one to try to challenge yourself to go outside and find. But there's a fun story that goes with Corvus the Crow, and his whole story plays out in the spring sky. So Corvus the Crow was sent by the god Apollo to go gather the cup of the gods, also known as Crater. Crater is right next to Corvus in the sky. It's really faint and it's hard to see. So you can, even now when we're zoomed up on the sky, it's still really hard to see, but it's these stars here that make sort of a semicircle and then a stem down here. So it's like a chalice. If I turn off the atmosphere, we might be able to see that a little bit more. It's still hard to see, but if you can get out to a dark sky site away from the city lights, you might be able to see this shape. But that's Crater the Cup. So Corvus the Crow was sent to gather Crater the Cup to bring back to Mount Olympus for the gods to use. And along the way, he found a fig. And that fig looked delicious, but it wasn't quite ripe yet. So he hung around waiting for the fig to ripen. And when it finally was ripe, he ate it. But now he was late bringing the cup back to the gods. And so he tried to come up with an excuse. And so his excuse was a water snake. So there's a water snake in the sky here. It's Hydra. So you can follow the star sort of around Corvus and Crater the Cup. It's sort of this zigzaggy thing up to here where we have this little house shape. And this is the head of Hydra. And so this is a very long string of stars to make Hydra the water snake. He took this water snake and he's like, this snake attacked me. That's why I was late. And of course that didn't happen. And Apollo figured that out. And so he threw them all up into the sky because he was mad. So there you go. Orion was placed in the sky, by the way, to honor him. So you can both be honored and be punished by being placed in the sky. So it's interesting. But anyway, these are our spring constellations: Leo, Buotes, Virgo, Corvus, Crater, and Hydra. So these are some great things to go outside and go look up in the springtime to go see. It's going to be warmer out. Hopefully we'll have some clear skies soon, so it won't be so chilly to go outside and see these wonderful constellations. So thank you all so much for having me. Go download Stellarium if you would like to go check out some of these constellations on your own. And we will see you again in a couple of months. Bye-bye.